Have you ever felt that life itself is a conversation? That the events, the emotions, the silence, and even the chaos around you are trying to say something profound, something divine? We, as chosen ones, often feel this pull, this awareness that there is a deeper rhythm to life. But do we truly understand the language God uses to speak to us? Do we hear the whisper beneath the noise? Or are we so caught up in the distractions of this world that we miss the very messages that could transform our lives? I want you to pause for a moment and reflect. Think back to a time when everything seemed to fall apart, when the ground beneath you crumbled, when your plans collapsed, and when the future seemed uncertain. Was that moment of chaos really just chaos? Or was it a carefully crafted message designed to break you free from what no longer served you? You see, God doesn't always speak in comfort. Sometimes He speaks in disruption. But the question is, are you listening?
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound spiritual lessons.
We live in a world that loves clarity, simplicity, and certainty. We want answers packaged neatly, delivered with precision. But God's messages don't always come in such forms. Sometimes they come as riddles, as paradoxes, as moments that challenge everything you think you know. Why? Because the chosen ones are not called to live by shallow truths. We are called to dive deep, to go beyond the surface and understand the sacred wisdom woven into every moment of life. The deeper you go, the more you'll realize that God's messages are not random. They're intentional. They're layered. Take, for example, the moments of rejection you faced. Maybe you were turned away from an opportunity you desperately wanted. Maybe someone you trusted betrayed you. At first, it felt like punishment, didn't it? But what if it was protection? What if God closed that door to redirect you towards something greater, something more aligned with your purpose? The question isn't why it happened. The real question is, did you understand the message? And here's the thing: God doesn't just speak through the big events. He speaks in the smallest details, the quietest moments. Have you ever looked at the way a leaf sways in the wind, or felt the warmth of the sun on your skin and thought, this is more than just nature? That's because it is. The chosen ones are often called to see the divine in the mundane. We're called to recognize that every sunrise, every breath, every interaction carries a hidden meaning, a divine thread connecting us to the Creator. But here's the challenge: do you slow down enough to notice? Or are you too busy chasing the next thing, running from one distraction to another? One of the greatest barriers to understanding God's messages is the noise around us. Social media, endless notifications, the constant pull of comparison and competition, these things drown out the whisper of the divine. They keep us focused on what is temporary, fleeting, and shallow. But God's messages require stillness. They require presence. They require a heart that is willing to sit in silence and say, "Speak, Lord. I am listening." So, I ask you this: when was the last time you truly listened? Not to the world, not to your own fears or desires, but to God. When was the last time you sat in the stillness and allowed His voice to penetrate the noise? And if you haven't done this, what might you be missing? What wisdom, what guidance, what profound truth could be waiting for you in the silence? The chosen ones are not strangers to hardship. In fact, it often seems as though we face more trials than others. But why? Is it because we're cursed? Because we're unlucky? No, it's because we are being prepared. You see, every trial you face is a classroom. Every heartbreak, every failure, every moment of doubt is a lesson. But the question is, are you paying attention? Let's be honest, when life gets hard, our first instinct is often to ask, why me? We feel frustrated, angry, even abandoned. But what if the question isn't why me? What if the real question is, what is this teaching me? Because God doesn't waste pain. He doesn't waste struggle. Every challenge you face is designed to shape you, to refine you, to prepare you for the calling on your life. But the chosen ones must learn to see trials not as obstacles, but as opportunities for growth. Think about this: a diamond doesn't become a diamond without pressure. Gold isn't purified without fire. And you, as a chosen one, cannot step into your purpose without being refined. But here's the hard truth: refinement isn't comfortable. It's messy. It's painful. It often feels like everything is falling apart. But in reality, everything is falling into place. The question is, do you trust the process? I want you to reflect on the hardest moment of your life. What did it teach you? How did it shape you? Maybe it taught you resilience. Maybe it showed you the power of faith. Maybe it revealed a strength within you that you didn't even know you had. These lessons are not accidents. They are intentional. They are God's way of preparing you for what's ahead. But here's the thing: if you don't learn the lesson, you'll keep repeating the trial. So I ask you again, are you paying attention? One of the most profound truths about being a chosen one is this: God will often remove things from your life, not because He wants to hurt you, but because He wants to make room for something greater. But here's the challenge: when God removes something, it often feels like a loss. We grieve, we hold on, we cling to what is familiar, even when it no longer serves us. But the chosen ones must learn to let go. We must trust that when God takes something away, it's because He has something better in store. And let's not forget the people in our lives. Have you ever wondered why certain people come into your life only to leave just as quickly? Or why some relationships seem to bring more pain than joy? It's because relationships are one of God's most powerful tools for teaching us. Some people are meant to challenge us, to test us, to show us the parts of ourselves that we'd rather not see. Others are meant to support us, to encourage us, to remind us of our worth. But every relationship carries a message. The question is, do you understand it? One of the hardest lessons for the chosen ones is learning to surrender. We live in a world that glorifies control. We're taught to plan, to strategize, to make things happen. But God's plan often doesn't align with our plans. And when that happens, we're faced with a choice: will we fight for control? Or will we surrender and trust that God's plan is greater than anything we could ever imagine? Surrender isn't passive. It's not about giving up or doing nothing. Surrender is an act of faith. It's saying, God, I don't understand. I don't see the full picture, but I trust you. It's releasing the need to know all the answers and choosing to walk by faith instead of sight. But let's be honest, this is easier said than done. So I ask you, what are you holding on to that you need to release? What are you fighting for that you need to surrender? One of the most beautiful things about surrender is that it opens the door for miracles. When we stop trying to control everything, we make room for God to move in ways that we could never have imagined. But here's the catch: miracles don't always look the way we expect. Sometimes a miracle is an open door. Sometimes it's a closed one. Sometimes it's a sudden breakthrough. Sometimes it's a slow, quiet transformation. The question is, Do you have the eyes to see it? As chosen ones, we are called to live not by fear, but by faith. We are called to trust that even when life feels uncertain, God is in control. But trust isn't easy. It requires us to let go of our need for certainty, our need for answers, our need for control. It requires us to say, God, I don't understand your plan, but I trust your heart. So as we close, I leave you with this. What would your life look like if you truly trusted God? If you stopped fighting, stopped striving, stopped trying to control everything, and simply surrendered? What could God do in your life if you gave him the space to move? You are chosen, you are called, and you are loved beyond measure. But the question remains, do you understand God's messages at the deepest level? So, now that we've explored how God speaks to us through trials, silence, and surrender, let's go deeper. Let's move from understanding God's messages to embodying them. Because here's the truth: understanding is only the beginning. The real transformation happens when we take what we've learned and live it out, when we allow God's messages to shape who we are, how we act, and how we show up in the world. But this raises a profound question: what does it mean to embody God's messages? It means that the wisdom God has given us doesn't just stay in our minds, it takes root in our hearts, it flows through our actions, and it becomes the foundation of our lives. God's messages are never meant to be intellectual exercises. They are meant to be lived. So I ask you again, are you living the truths God has revealed to you? Or are you merely hearing them, nodding in agreement, and then going back to life as usual? Let's be honest, living out God's messages isn't always easy. It often requires us to go against the grain, to make choices that others don't understand, and to walk a path that feels lonely at times. But the chosen ones are not called to fit in. We are called to stand out. We are called to be lights in a world that is often dark. And that means we cannot merely understand God's messages, we must embody them. Think about the times when God has spoken to you through Scripture, through prayer, or through the still, small voice in your heart. Did you act on what you heard? Did you allow that message to change you? Or did you hesitate, doubt, and let fear hold you back? Because the truth is, embodying God's messages requires courage. It requires faith. It requires a willingness to step into the unknown, trusting that God's plan is greater than our fears. One of the most profound ways we can embody God's messages is through love. Love is the essence of who God is, and it is the foundation of everything He calls us to do. But let's get real for a moment. Loving others the way God loves us is not easy. It means loving people who hurt us. It means forgiving those who don't deserve it. It means extending grace when it's inconvenient and choosing compassion over judgment. But here's the thing: when we embody God's love, we become living, breathing reflections of His presence in the world. And that, my friends, is one of the most powerful ways to understand God's messages at the deepest level. But embodying God's messages isn't just about how we treat others, it's also about how we see ourselves. Let's face it, many of us struggle to see ourselves the way God sees us. We focus on our flaws, our failures, and our shortcomings, and we forget that we are fearfully and wonderfully made. But here's the truth: if you are a chosen one, then you are called to see yourself through God's eyes. You are called to walk in confidence, knowing that you are loved, valued, and equipped for the purpose God has placed on your life. So let me ask you, do you see yourself the way God sees you? Or are you still letting the world define your worth? Another way we embody God's messages is through obedience. And let me tell you, obedience is not always easy. Sometimes God calls us to do things that don't make sense, things that challenge our logic, our comfort, and our plans. But obedience is the ultimate act of trust. It's saying, God, I don't understand, but I will follow you anyway. And when we obey, we open the door for God to work miracles in our lives. So I ask you again, are you willing to obey, even when it's hard, even when it's hard, even when it doesn't make sense? As chosen ones, we must also understand that God's messages are not static, they are dynamic. They unfold in layers, revealing deeper and deeper truths as we grow in faith and maturity. You might hear a message from God today and think you understand it, only to realize years later that there was so much more to it than you originally thought. This is the beauty of God's wisdom. It is infinite. It is alive. It meets us where we are, but it also calls us to go further, to dig deeper, to seek more. Have you ever read a scripture verse that spoke to you in a certain way, and then read it again years later and found an entirely new meaning? That's because God's word is alive. It grows with us. It reveals new insights as we become ready to receive them. But here's the challenge: are we willing to keep seeking? Are we willing to keep asking God, what are you saying to me now? What new layer of your truth do you want me to see? The chosen ones must cultivate a spirit of humility and curiosity. We must recognize that no matter how much we think we know, there is always more to learn. God's wisdom is like an ocean. No matter how deep we dive, there is always more to discover. But diving deep requires effort. It requires discipline. It requires a hunger for truth that drives us to seek God with all our hearts, minds, and souls. So I ask you, how deep are you willing to go? How much are you willing to seek? One of the greatest obstacles to understanding God's messages at the deepest level is our own ego. Let's be honest, sometimes we think we know better than God. We resist His guidance because it doesn't align with our plans. We cling to our own understanding, even when it leads us in circles. But here's the truth: God's ways are higher than our ways. His thoughts are higher than our thoughts. And if we want to understand His messages, we must be willing to let go of our pride, our assumptions, and our need to control. Imagine standing in front of a vast, intricate tapestry. Up close, all you can see are individual threads, some bright, some dark, some tangled. But when you step back, you see the full picture, a masterpiece. This is what it's like to understand God's messages. In the moment, we may only see a single thread. But as we grow in faith, as we step back and trust the Creator, we begin to see how every thread, every moment, every message is part of a divine masterpiece. So I ask you again, are you willing to step back and trust the bigger picture? Here's the ultimate truth: the chosen ones are not just called to understand God's messages. We are called to become the message. We are called to live in such a way that our very lives reflect God's love, wisdom, and truth. This is the highest calling, and it is also the greatest challenge. To become the message means to live with integrity, even when no one is watching. It means to walk in faith, even when the path is unclear. It means to love others, even when it's hard. And it means to trust God, even when life doesn't make sense. But most of all, it means to surrender fully to God's will, allowing Him to shape us into vessels of His glory. So my final question to you is this: are you ready? Are you ready to not only understand God's messages, but to embody them, to live them, to become them? Because the world is watching. world is in desperate need of light, of hope, of truth. And as chosen ones, we are called to be that light. We are called to carry God's messages into the world, not just with our words, but with our lives. You are chosen. You are called. You are deeply loved. But the question remains, will you answer the call? Being chosen is not a title of privilege, it's a call to responsibility. Many people romanticize the concept of being a chosen one, thinking it means you are set apart for greatness without realizing the sacrifices, the burdens, and the accountability that come with it. To be chosen is to carry the weight of God's purpose. It is to live in service of something far greater than yourself. But here's a question you must ask yourself: are you willing to bear that responsibility? You see, the chosen ones are not just chosen for their own benefit. We are chosen to be instruments of God's will. That means our lives are not entirely our own. Every gift, every talent, every opportunity we've been given is meant to glorify God and serve others. But the challenge is, are we using what we've been given wisely? Are we stewarding the responsibilities God has entrusted to us? Take a moment to reflect on your life. Look at the skills you possess, the blessings you've received, and the influence you hold. Do you truly believe these things are random? Or do you recognize that they were given to you for a reason? And if you believe they were given to you for a reason, the deeper question is, what are you doing with them? God's messages often come in the form of opportunities. They come as nudges, as doors that open unexpectedly, as people who cross your path at just the right time. But the chosen ones must discern these moments. We must have the wisdom to recognize when God is calling us to act, and we must have the courage to step forward, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's inconvenient. So I ask you, are you saying yes to God's call? Or are you hesitating, waiting for a more convenient time? To carry the responsibility of being chosen means that you must live with intention. You cannot afford to be careless with your time, your words, or your actions. Every moment, every decision, every interaction carries weight. Every choice you make either draws you closer to God's purpose or pulls you further away. But here's the thing: living with intention doesn't mean striving for perfection. It means striving for alignment. It means asking yourself in every situation, am I walking in step with God's will? Am I honoring the calling He has placed on my life? But let's be real, responsibility can feel heavy. There are days when the weight of being chosen feels like too much to bear. There are moments when you might feel isolated, misunderstood, or even overwhelmed by the magnitude of what God is asking of you. And in those moments, it's easy to question, why me? Why did God choose me when I feel so unworthy, so ill-equipped, so flawed? Here's the truth: God didn't choose you because you are perfect. He chose you because He knows what He placed inside you. He chose you because He sees your potential, even when you don't. He chose you because His strength is made perfect in your weakness. And when you feel like you can't carry the weight, remember this: you were never meant to carry it alone. God is with you. He is your strength. He is your strength. He is your guide. And He will equip you for every task He has called you to. But I want to challenge you with this: are you leaning on God, or are you trying to carry the weight on your own? Because the chosen ones are not called to rely on their own strength. We are called to rely on God's strength. We are called to walk in humility, to acknowledge our dependence on Him, and to trust that He will provide everything we need for the journey. Let's talk about obedience. It's one of the most difficult aspects of being a chosen one, but it's also one of the most essential. To be chosen is to walk in obedience to God's will, even when it costs you something. And let's be honest, obedience often comes with a cost. It might cost you your comfort. It might cost you your plans. It might even cost you relationships. But here's the question you must wrestle with. Are you willing to pay the price? Think about the story of Abraham. God called him to leave everything he knew, his home, his family, his security, and go to a land he had never seen. Can you imagine the faith that required? Can you imagine the questions that must have filled his mind? And yet, Abraham obeyed. He trusted that God's plan was greater than his own. And because of his obedience, he stepped into the destiny God had prepared for him. But here's the thing, Abraham's story isn't just a historical account. It's a blueprint for us as chosen ones. God will often call us to step out in faith, to leave behind what is familiar, and to trust Him with the unknown. And when He does, the question is, will you obey, even when it's hard? Even when it doesn't make sense? Obedience is not about understanding every step of the journey. It's about trusting the one who is leading you. It's about surrendering your plans, your timeline, and your expectations and saying, God, your will be done. But let's be real, this level of surrender is not easy. It requires faith. It requires trust. And it requires a willingness to let go of control. So let me ask you, what are you holding on to that God is asking you to release? What are you resisting that God is asking you to embrace? Here's the truth: obedience is not just about what you do, it's about who you become. Every act of obedience shapes you. It deepens your faith. It strengthens your character. And it aligns you more closely with God's purpose for your life. But here's the challenge: obedience often requires you to walk through discomfort. It requires you to face your fears, to confront your doubts, and to trust God in the midst of uncertainty. So I ask you again, are you willing to obey, even when it's uncomfortable? Finally, let's talk about legacy. Being chosen is not just about what you do in your lifetime, it's about the impact you leave for generations to come. The chosen ones are called to plant seeds of faith, hope, and love that will bear fruit long after they are gone. But here's the question: what kind of legacy are you building? Think about the people who have impacted your faith journey. Think about the mentors, the friends, the family members who showed you what it means to walk with God. Their legacy lives on in you. And now, as a chosen one, you are called to do the same. You are called to be a light for others, to inspire faith, to offer hope, and to point people toward God. But the question is, are you living in a way that reflects the legacy you want to leave behind? Legacy is not built in a single moment. It's built in the small, daily choices we make. It's built in the way we treat others, the way we respond to challenges, and the way we live out our faith. So I ask you, what choices are you making today that will shape the legacy you leave tomorrow? Here's the truth: being chosen is both a privilege and a responsibility. It's a call to live with intention, to walk in obedience, and to trust God with every aspect of your life. And when you do, you become more than just a recipient of God's messages, you become a messenger. You become a living testament to God's love, grace, and power. And that, my friends, is the greatest legacy you could ever leave.